everyone. This is Jane with Barlow Herbal, and in this video, I'm excited to share with you some amazing information about a beautiful North American indigenous tree, and that is the wild cherry bark. This is also known as Prunus serotina, and it has been loved and used by the indigenous people for centuries. In fact, there's no exact known date, but it could go back thousands of years. And when the Europeans started settling over into North America, it became a much loved medicinal herbal for them too. In fact, it goes back to the early 1800s where this became a very cherished herbal remedy, and it still is to this day. So I have some really wonderful information to share with you. And I think that where we sit in this beautiful time in human history, I'm in the middle of June of 2026, and this is such an important time and a great remembering, not only that we are divine sparks of pure love and consciousness and a piece of God, but we are connected to this beautiful living Mother Earth that provides everything for us. And this is part of the great remembering, because we need to be in vibrant, good health while we're here, while we're experiencing, while we're learning, growing, all the different things that the paths that we're all on. So this is one thing that I really love about the times that we're in. Feels very, very different if you study ancient texts on not just herbal medicine and herbal remedies, but what humanity has been through and the cycles of, all the things that we go through. I believe that we're in a really different time. And maybe every single generation that experiences this feels exactly the same way, that there's never been a time like this. It's always so amazing. And we are at a peak of tipping humanity into love and light and getting rid of all the dark forces that keep us down, right? So I really believe that we are in a very cool time. So let's talk about the amazing wild cherry bark. Now, this is something I love. I have experience with it. And I remember watching my dad only one time showing me how to peel the bark off of a wild cherry tree, because there is a certain way to do that. In fact, you want the young bark. You don't want to pull it off of the main trunk. These trees do grow really, really big, typically anywhere from 50 to 80 feet, but they can get up to 100 feet in the right conditions. And it's a pretty fast growing tree. So if you're going to plant this strategically, like in your yard, in your garden, just know that first of all, it does take patience before you can use it medicinally, but this is something that you're planting for future generations. And it will get really, really big. In fact, that is actually what I think is one of the beautiful things about a tree like the wild cherry tree, because it is medicinal and you can also use the cherries for food, obviously. But this is something that it has been well known and used and loved, and it can spread. It spreads all around, mostly because the birds love it and they will pluck a cherry, eat it, fly away, and then they'll drop the pit, or the pit will just drop even if the cherry's not done. And this is where most of the wild cherry trees have been planted are by birds that spread them all around. So this is a really cool tree with a ton of great benefits. So it's native to North America and one of the continent's most important medicinal trees. Okay, and this might be something that you don't know, right? Okay, so the medicinal portion is in the inner bark. If you were to go into a place and forage for this, what I would first of all suggest is make sure you're going to a place where you can not only sustainably, but legally do this. You probably don't want to go into a park. It is considered kind of a weed tree, so you're going to see it in forests and you're going to see it in places where it's very prolific. It grows a lot. There can be dead branches. In fact, the tree bark that my dad, when I actually watched him do this that one time, it was actually a tree that was mostly dead. There was a pretty good size. The trunk was about this big of the one that we took it off of. And it was half bent over. And I believe it was probably bent over from some snowfall or maybe maybe the wind. But the bottom part was still alive. And that is actually what you want, because that's where all of the medicinal properties are. So when you take your knife, you don't want to slice it around, because then it could actually kill that part of the tree. What you want to do is you want to take and slice it on the outside and cut out a chunk, like a rectangular chunk of the outer bark. Just peel that off, and then you will see the inner bark. And the cool thing about wild cherry, and this is where you'll know it's wild cherry, is when you peel back the bark, you'll get the aroma of almonds. It's got this really sweet, it smells almost like marzipan or amaretto, but it smells like almonds. And to me, this is like one of the magical things of plants like this that bring forth this beautiful aroma. So it makes you wonder what's hiding in all the secret places of all the plants that are out there, right? So then what you want to do is you want to just, strip as much as you want out of there, maybe extend the section that you cut. And this is where all the beautiful properties are. And take as much as you need. It usually is not a lot. And then you want to take it and dry it. And my favorite way to use wild cherry bark is to tincture it. You can also use it in a tea. You can make it out of a tea. I do find it to be a little bit stronger in a tincture, and it can get all those resins and all of the medicinal properties. And then you've got a super long shelf life too. Now, one of the things that we do make that has wild cherry bark in it is our very famous and very delicious throat spray. In fact, if you look on the label, the very first ingredient is wild cherry bark. And that is because it's so well known for its amazing medicinal properties. So the information that I share with you is not meant to be medical advice. This is just based on my own experience, my own research, and is my own opinion. Okay. So make sure you do your due diligence whenever you're adding anything into your diet, into your supplement routine. But one of the best things that I love about wild cherry bark is it has a big, long history of very, very, very safe use for human beings for a long, long time. And there is a really quirky thing about wild cherry bark that I'm excited to share with you. But first, let's go through the very well-known health benefits of this plant. So the most important one, and the one that it's most used for, is for cough relief. Dry coughs, irritating coughs, persistent coughs, and especially nighttime coughs. If you think about when you lay down, your sinuses might start running, things kind of relax and loosen up, and nighttime coughs can be really hard to deal with because you can't sleep, right? So this is why it works. It appears to calm the coughing reflex, okay? And it soothes irritated respiratory pathways, and it has been historically considered one of the best herbal remedies for non-productive coughs. So think about that when you get a little bit further into a cold where there's a cough involved, and it's just a dry, hard, really hurts your throat to cough, can kind of hurt your lungs too. So this is where wild cherry bark is so historically, traditionally known for, is in helping soothe that in a non-productive cough. It's also really well known for its respiratory support. Bronchitis, airway irritation, seasonal respiratory discomfort, and lingering coughs after illness. Again, this is one of the main reasons that I put it in our herb throat spray, is because you think about how long a cough can linger. And I have a couple members of my family that once something like that gets a hold of them, a bad cold with a cough, sometimes it can take them, if they aren't proactive or realize, oh, I have this herbal remedy that's going to support me, it can take them several months or even several weeks just to get over a cough. So here's what wild cherry bark is often paired with: mullein, licorice, and horehound. All three of those are also in the throat spray. Now, it's also known for mild nervous system support. So nervous coughs, restlessness caused by coughing. Okay, so this is why number one health benefit is coughing. Okay, because think about what happens when you can't stop coughing. It messes up your whole nervous system as well. difficulty sleeping due to respiratory irritation. So it's not a strong sedative. It's very, very mild, only because it helps relax those things that can cause you to have that nervous tension. And it is considered gently calming. It does have astringent effects. So it's great for toning your tissues, reducing excess secretions. So think about things that are dripping and like your sinuses are dripping and all the miserable things that come along with a cold, respiratory infections, and things like that. It does support irritated mucous membranes, and it's used for mild digestive upset, diarrhea, and excess mucus production. And what I love too is it has powerful antioxidant compounds, which a lot of plants do. That's one of the things that makes them so amazing for human beings. Think about getting rid of free radicals. It's not been really well known for its anti-cancer properties, which a lot of antioxidant benefits tend to provide. But what this is known for and what it provides is absolutely amazing. So this is where it prefers to grow. Okay. It loves full sun, but the young trees will grow really well in a half shaded, half sun area. But once, you've got a full tree, I wouldn't plant it in a shady area because where it thrives is in full sun. And if you live in a place where there's not a lot of moisture, it will need you to water it and irrigate it. Like places where I live, it's going to need irrigation, especially the first 2 or 3 years until it gets really well established. And even then, when you live in a dry place like this here in Utah, we will have really, really dry summers and even really dry winters. But the tree tends to go dormant. It'll lose all its leaves and then it'll come back in the springtime. And the best time to harvest the bark is not in the fall. So I'm going to go into that a little bit further on the reasons why. Okay, so here's where it prefers: forest edges, open woodlands, mixed hardwood forests, disturbed areas, and old fields. There is a very strong wildlife importance to the wild cherry tree because it grows all throughout North America, parts in Canada, all over. In fact, it can grow in parts of Mexico as well, but mostly northern America, including Canada. The fruits feed songbirds, bears, foxes, wild turkeys, and other small mammals. So it's an important food source for wild animals, which is great. And the cool thing too is it supports hundreds of insect species as well. So, and it's a great pollinator. If you were to look at a beautiful wild cherry tree in the spring, it's got these clusters of beautiful white flowers. And then, of course, that's what turns into where the cherries are. It makes it perfect for the birds and the animals, the mammals that eat it. And then the humans can eat the cherries as well. The most concentrated medicinal properties is in the bark. And the bark of the younger branches, like I said, you don't want to harvest the bark from the big trunk of, especially of an old established cherry tree. In fact, it's very, very, very hard. It would be difficult to dig into a bark, the big trunk, once it reaches a certain amount. Now, some of the indigenous people that are well known for using this were the Cherokee, the Iroquois, and the Delaware. But it was used by many indigenous Native Americans throughout all of North America. So the exact dates were unknown of how long it's been used, but it's been used for several hundred years before the arrival of the Europeans. And I think potentially thousands of years, because you look at some of these trees and how well they're established, how adaptable they are, and simply supporting the wildlife throughout these different places that these trees grow. So basically it was widely prescribed by physicians and herbalists in the early 1800s and beyond, before modern medicine jumped in, scattered the information, dissolved the information, got rid of, I think there were books that were destroyed and gotten rid of. And the knowledge really was held on by people who were in small groups, people who passed it down to the next generation. And now we are at a beautiful time where this is coming back, which is amazing. So here's what these physicians used it for: cough syrups, tonics, expectorants, and children's remedies, which is amazing. Now here's something really cool that I knew about, but I wanted to do a little bit deeper research on it. Okay, so not only the pits of a cherry, but also the leaves and the bark in smaller amounts, they contain a small amount of a naturally occurring cyanide. Okay, so here's what I found. Wild cherry belongs to a group of plants containing cyanogenic glycosides. These compounds can release small amounts of hydrogen cyanide under certain conditions. Okay, and this is the important thing to know. Okay, this is found in the leaves, the twigs, the bark, the roots, the seeds, and the pits. Very little is found in the edible fruit. So the fruit flesh, very little is found. And it's not enough to cause a worry unless you were to eat massive amounts of cherries that you probably couldn't fit into your body at the same time. Okay, so trace amounts. This belongs in a similar chemical family as plants like this: apricot kernels, peach pits, plum pits, cherry pits, bitter almonds, and apple seeds. In fact, this is something that I've known about since I was a little girl, because I remember my dad, when he would eat an apple, he would not just eat, most of the apple, he would eat the core of the apple, which had the seeds in it. And he would tell us that the seeds contained a small amount of amygdalin or laetrile or cyanide. And actually, I don't know if it is the laetrile. I know laetrile was also known as B17, although it's like vitamin D, not technically a vitamin. It's actually demonized by the modern medical community. But my dad did study apricot pits and the B17 or the amygdalin that was in it. But in the cherry pits is something different, but it belongs in the same chemical family as that. This seems a lot more scientific to share with you than just off the top of my head. So this is what I found. The tree does not store large amount of free cyanide. Instead, it stores precursor compounds such as prunicin and related cyanogenic glycosides. They only release the cyanide when the plant tissues are damaged. Okay, so think about that. When it's damaged, that's when this cyanide is released. So what will happen, and this is really cool what I found, if there's a tree in a pasture, a big old cherry tree, the wild cherry, and a storm breaks a branch, and the branch is full of leaves and on the ground, what they found is if cattle started munching on these leaves, especially because now it's damaged and it's starting to decompose, now there's an enzyme that is released that activates this cyanide in the leaves. So farmers will automatically, because they've done this for centuries, if there's a storm or there's a broken branch and there's leaves that their cattle, their animals might eat, they go and make sure and clear all of these broken branches so that they can't consume the leaves. Okay. So wilted black cherry leaves can be highly toxic to horses, cattle, and goats. This is why farmers often remove fallen branches after storms. Okay. So I thought that was really fascinating. Something that I knew about the connection of this compound, and I knew that it was in the same chemical family as what you find in apricot pits and apple seeds, but I did not realize that there was an enzyme that was released, which makes a lot of sense because plants and trees and things that Mother Nature creates have actually evolved to protect themselves and decompose in a way that is really, really fascinating. So then I found some really cool kind of symbolic interpretations of the wild cherry. It's known as breath and life force because it supports the lungs. Wild cherry is often symbolically associated with breath, voice, spirit, and vitality. I love that. There is sweetness hidden within the bitterness. The bark is bitter. The tree produces sweet fruit. Fresh bark smells sweet. And symbolically, this suggests that there's transformation, wisdom through hardship, and hidden blessings. I love these symbolic meanings behind the tree. In fact, there's one thing that I did know about that I really love. There are great sources. I'll put a couple of my favorite herbal sources down below this video that you can get like 4 ounces or even 1 pound of something like wild cherry bark. And there's a mystical, magical belief that you can take a small amount of wild cherry bark and almost burn it like incense. And apparently the myth goes that if you burn a small amount of wild cherry bark, and of course, if you're going to do this somewhere safe. Don't do this, where if you're lighting anything, make sure that you're careful. And I know I have to give a disclaimer. I don't want you to take a whole pound of wild cherry bark and just start burning it. But what this is known for is for calling in your soulmate. So it's known as bringing in love, which I think is such a fun, some of these mystical, magical traditions with plants like this are amazing. And I think there must be something to clearing the air. It's almost like Palo Santo to, the smell of it just, I use it on a regular basis. I'll light some Palo Santo, let it burn for 60 seconds, and then I'll just take the smoke and walk it around. I'll walk it around outside. It smells so good. Wild cherry bark is the same. In fact, when you burn a tiny bit of it, you'll get a little bit of bitter with the sweet, a little bit of that almond smell. It's really, really amazing. So look at this as, I think, the dichotomy here, the opposites is medicine and poison at the same time if you look at that cyanide factor. So one of the tree's most intriguing qualities to me are this: it heals, it nourishes, but it can also be toxic if misused. So this makes it what I consider a classic threshold plant. So it represents this: balance, respect, duality, and transformation. So I would love to know what you think about wild cherry, the wild cherry tree. Have you ever harvested the bark of a wild cherry tree? And if so, what's your experience? Do you have a wild cherry tree in your yard that you think, oh my gosh, this drops all this fruit? The birds mess, it can be considered a little bit of a weed tree because it does grow big and it drops a lot of things and it can spread out. You can have little saplings growing. It does take a little bit to get a tree established, but if it's going to grow from a seed. But in fact, if you want to grow a wild cherry bark tree, it's a little tougher to germinate from a seed, and you can get very small saplings, ones that are like 1 foot to 3 feet tall. And if you want to grow one, if you've got the space, and think of this as growing something for future generations, because it does take a while to get established and grow before you can harvest all of the benefits of the wild cherry bark. So thanks for tuning in today, guys. I'd love to know what you think about this amazing plant, and we will see you next time.